Hello and welcome to TalkBGKY, the official podcast of the city of Bowling Green, Kentucky. Today we're here talking with Bowling Green police officer and departmental spokesman Ronnie Ward about a cold case. This is the case involving Louis Reynolds. He was killed in August of 1966. Tell me what happened to Mr. Reynolds.
So this case does go back for quite some time, and this quite possibly would be the oldest case that we have that is still in the hands of a detective. And I just have to be honest, I don't know what qualifies that to say when would they at some point in time stop investigating a case. But this is the oldest one that we have. It happened August the 7th in 1966. And if you think in your mind, it's at the corner of Russellville Road and Emmett. And there's a gas station there now. There was a gas station there in 1966, and it was Consumers Gas Station. And so Louis Reynolds was an attendant at the gas station that worked the overnight hours, as we would say, third shift. And he was located very early on the 7th, very, very early in the morning, by someone who pulled up to get gas. Now, you have to remember, in that point in time, you drove up to the gas station. There was a bell, the tube that you ran over, that summoned the attendant. The attendant came out, did whatever you need, cleaned your windshield, checked the oil, put gas in your car, and then you went on your way. And so that's what this customer was expecting. And the customer waited. No one came out. So he went inside and found Mr. Reynolds on the floor of the gas station, covered in blood, and he was dead. So that obviously he summoned the police then.
And so what appeared to be the motive of that murder?
So we always talk about why did this happen, and you need to know that because it sort of helps you understand, and can also help you maybe figure out who did this. In this particular case, we believe that robbery was the motive, and what gave us those indications were that his pants were ripped. And there were receipts in his pocket that were also ripped. So we had to believe that there was money in his pocket. And so that would make sense that in that time that they would go out, fill someone's car up, put gas in their car, whatever they needed to do, and would make change out of their pocket, keep their money in their pocket.
This was way before the days of debit cards and those
Yeah.
kinds of transactions. People paid with cash back then.
Yeah, they did. And so somehow we were able to figure out, and I don't know this exactly, but I'm assuming that you're checking the register, checking the receipts, we were able to determine there was about $150 missing. And so had to be robbery, right? It just only made sense that the money was gone and he was shot. There was evidence of a struggle. So it would lead us to believe that he was trying to not get the money taken that was in his pocket or trying not to get assaulted. But then at some point in time during the robbery, he was killed.
All right. And so what do you do with a case that's this old? Is there still physical evidence that can be sent off to be re-examined by the lab? What do you have that you can use to continue looking into this?
So that's something that even we can't, and a person in general just can't really think of what the future is going to hold. And so you can't really think, well, this item that I have now is useless because the lab can't test it in 1966, and there's really not going to be any value to it. But if you hold on to these items, and we've seen historically that DNA changes, the scientific way of testing shell cartridges changes, all types of new ways of looking at evidence has come to light. So that's why we don't want to give up on this. And so in this particular case, we have casings that were fired from a gun, and we have a bullet that was retrieved from Mr. Reynolds' body. And so those items are still in evidence at some point in time if technology changes enough to figure out if we can get touch DNA off of it, or if we can figure out which weapon has been fired. Those things we can do, but it has never led to any particular person or to a particular gun that we. So you think about if you fire a cartridge out of or fire a bullet out of a gun, the cartridge falls on the ground, we might be able to tell you where that bullet came from, what gun it was fired out of, but where's the gun? And so you have to come across the gun in order to say this was the gun that was used. And so we have the cartridge, but we'd sure like to have the gun. Now whether that gun exists now, we don't know. I mean, that's certainly part of this case, is to determine where's the murder weapon, because if you think about it, if you have the weapon on you, you may know something about this. In this day and time, it would not be that you did the murder, but you would kind of give us an idea of backwards where we would go to try to figure out who was holding the gun at the time.
Or you might have an idea if the gun was given to you by a family member, that hey, my cousin gave me this gun years ago.
Yes. And that's why I think you don't ever really, at some point in time, everyone involved with the case would no longer be around.
Sure.
And so in this particular case, it's possible that there's someone that's still around that knows about this, that knew about this, that heard about it, maybe involved, and they want to come clean. So we try to put these out into the media every so often just to refresh it, just to let the family of Louis Reynolds know that, hey, we've not given up on this. But is there somebody out there that just feels like they need to get something off their chest? And so that's something we would always be open to listening.
And you guys do keep your cold cases front and center by talking about them.
Yes.
Like right now, and you talk about them with the media. You post them online just to get information on it. So does he still have family living here? Yeah,
see, we do know that there are some family. They don't live here, but he does have some family. But that's being the spokesperson for the department is something that I sort of want to do, is to keep this in front of people in whatever way, shape, or form. A few years ago, we did a social media push on all of our cold cases at that time that we did through Facebook, and we just did a video with the detective that has the case, and they tell the case, and we just want to make sure that the family knows, hey, we're still looking at this, and the public knows we haven't forgotten. Mm-hmm. And if you have any information, we certainly want you to come forward with that information.
So let's say you're a new detective, you come in, you are given this case file. Where do you start on something like this? What is your starting point?
Yeah, so the very first thing that you do, and for the listeners, I have the case file laid out in front of me right here because I want Debbie to see. So now you think about when we take a report, it's all done on the computer, it's entered into the computer, it's transferred electronically various places. Everyone looks at it on a computer screen. This case file is full of handwritten notes, and there's very, very little of it that is typed. I do have the report that is typed, but you can tell this was typed on a typewriter. This was not,
Sure.
This is not through a computer. But the very first thing that you do is you familiarize yourself with what the report says, and then what the evidence is that you have. And then you start looking through the notes that prior detectives have made. Now, at some point in time, you will come across notes that are typed from various detectives that have held this case throughout the years. We did start using computers, and so those were going to be on computer, and they're going to be printed out, and they're in the case. But from that day, in 1966, the detectives that came through this case, that filtered through this case, they've typed very, very little of this. Most of it is written. So something that even I've done with this case, and I know the detectives that are holding this case have done, is just trying to figure out, what does this say? Because the handwriting is tough, But there are several interesting things about this case, and one of them is that the detectives then and they sent these casings off to the FBI lab, and so they.
Oh wow!
So that was really neat to see, because the notes handwritten that he was trying to gather his thoughts on what he was going to say when he sent this off to the lab in Washington D.C. And so this case, they sent them there and sent them back, and didn't really tell us anything more than what we knew, but it is entered into the system, and it's a 22 was the gun that was used, and we knew that, but obviously we want that recorded so that if we can come across the gun, it may very well match these casings.
And so that's recorded is that still in NCIC?
It is.
So if that gun were to turn up in another homicide,
yes,
and get entered in,
right,
then you could at least link, like you said, the projectiles to the gun.
Right. So, and it's a little different now, even because time goes on and things are updated and new procedures and new ways of doing things, and so we're able to now we have the marking system with the casing that if a casing is found somewhere now, we'll know that it matches our casing. And so if this gun is fired anywhere in the United States, it'll link back to this crime, which really makes me wonder, where is the gun? And
Sure.
So you have to think, well, did they throw it off a river, into the river off a bridge? Or is it in someone's lockbox in a house? You just, there's all types of ideas to think about. Where did the gun go? There are some speculations with this case. There was some guys that were they were AWOL, for the lack of a better term, from Fort Campbell, and they were traveling in Bowling Green. They were in or around about the service station when this happened, but from the best that we've been able to tell, there was never enough to say that any one of these guys did this. The vehicle was seen. The vehicle was then seen entering the base in Fort Campbell, so they were questioned in Fort Campbell in relation to this crime.
Wow.
And so what we figured out is they were really more concerned about, they were not supposed to be off base, and we put them in Bowling Green, and that really was the biggest problem for them, not the fact that this person was dead. Now we do know that at least one of the guys saw Louis Reynolds deceased on the floor, because they had gone in to try to get the oil checked on his car, but they were so scared about being away from the base, they didn't want any trouble.
So they didn't report it.
They didn't report it, and they left. And so that would say, well, you're being deceptive, and you know, a lot of assumptions could be made, but look, proving that somebody did something is sometimes a lot harder than even if you think they did it. Proving
Sure.
it's still going to be a problem. But we have written statements from these guys that they went through everything that happened and what they were doing, and they realized that, I don't know if they ever got in any trouble, with the military, but they were not supposed to be here. The other interesting part is there was an 11-year-old boy who was at the station, but he was not inside the station when this happened. He was in a car that was parked, which was Louis's car, parked behind the station. So Louis at that point in time was known for sort of befriending people, and he would take the kids fishing that didn't, maybe didn't have an opportunity, but he was just sort of the friends with lots of people. And he had taken this young man fishing, and I don't know the circumstances that would lead up to the child being in the car, on why he wasn't at home, why he was in the car. I don't know anything.
Yeah, because that was in the middle of the night.
It was the middle of the night, right? And so at some point in time, the young man wakes up. He walks in. He sees Louis laying in the floor and can't wake him up, so he starts walking down the road. Now, the problem with saying all of this is everybody says, gosh, the traffic must have been, this was 1966.
Sure.
Russellville Road was not what it is now. So when you're picturing this, you're picturing what Russellville Road looks like today, but you can't. You have to think back to 1966. So there wasn't a lot of traffic. But finally someone did see him and stopped him and said, hey, where are you going? He said, well, I'm trying to walk to my house at this place. And I'm like, that's a long way from here. Let me take you. So they picks the boy up and takes him to his house. And the boy doesn't ever tell him anything about what he saw. As we figure out later, he thinks Louis is like asleep. He doesn't, but he just can't wake him up. But he said he was covered in something, and he said it was like oil. And in fact, I've got some of it on me. I think it's just he's covered in oil, but he's asleep. I can't wake him up. But to an 11-year-old, that just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Sure.
Well, so at that point in time, we'd sure like to talk to the 11-year-old. We just didn't really get a whole lot of details because he didn't see anything until after the fact. Well, now you fast forward to now, that 11-year-old, he's not alive anymore. And he at some point in time died. And whatever information he had, he took with him that we weren't able to gain from him. Whether he was able to remember something later, I don't know. But
So no one ever talked to him?
no one ever really interviewed him. And there were some circumstances surrounding the fact of him being interviewed. It may have been that his family didn't really want him to talk to the police. And so you have to take that into consideration and be certainly respectful of that.
And it was a different time.
It was a much different time. And so you look and you say, well, you make that boy talk. Well, you can't do that. It's just not legal, right? And it wasn't legal then.
And you can't really make anyone talk
if
they don't want to.
You can't. And so we don't think that he had anything to do with it.
Sure.
We just thought, well, maybe he remembered something, years later, and but we never were able to glean any more information from him. So there's just a few things about this case. You're like, gosh, we just seemed like we were maybe so close, but yet never able to prove anything. One specific, putting a gun in one specific person's hand. Who killed Louis Reynolds is what it comes down to.
Well, thank you so much for being here today and talking about Mr. Reynolds' case. If any of you have information about this crime, maybe a family member told you something, maybe you're hanging on to a gun from the 60s that you don't know where it came from, give the Bowling Green Police Department a call. They would love to hear from you. They want your information. They don't just let these cases sit in a file and not do anything with them. They're still trying to solve this case and many others. So thank you for being here today, Ronnie.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Talk BGKY, the official podcast of the City of Bowling Green, Kentucky.